The story of Loudoun is how generations have dealt with the forces that shaped the land, and how the land in turn shaped the history, heritage, and livelihood of its people. Located on the Upper Potomac, Loudoun is part of the Piedmont region of Virginia, whose hilly farmland borders the Appalachian and Blue Ridge mountain chains to the west. When the English established Jamestown in 1607, the Piedmont and Shenandoah regions of northern Virginia were largely unoccupied by native Indians. The Upper Potomac acted as a buffer, dividing two great native Indian nations, the Iroquois to the north and the Powhatans to the east. The Iroquois nation used the land as a hunting reservation for buffalo and other wildlife, until they lost control of it in 1722 through the Treaty of Albany. One of the first Europeans to map the Upper Potomac and Shenandoah region was a Swiss named Franz Ludwig Michel. His 1707 map shows that he encountered geese, deer, buffalo, and wild turkey on his journey. In the mid-1720s, English farmers began to settle in present-day Loudoun County. Soon afterwards, German farmers and Quakers from Pennsylvania and New Jersey settled in the northern and western parts of the future county. By 1757, the population was large enough to successfully petition the colonial capital in Williamsburg to create a new county. It was named after John Campbell, the 4th Earl of Loudoun and commander of British forces in America. The county was created with boundaries running south from the Potomac and west to the foothills of the Blue Ridge. During much of its early history, Loudoun County served as a crossroads between the large settlements in the east and the new British settlements west of the Appalachian Mountains. On the eve of the American Revolution, most farms or plantations in Loudoun were of modest size, averaging between 100 and 500 acres. Many of these first settlers were subsistent farmers, growing grain crops to feed their families. Loudoun provided its quota of men to the Continental Army. Escaping the ravages of war, the county's small surplus of crops was used to feed the army and nearby counties. After the war, the county settled into a quiet agrarian economy that would change little for the next century. This time of peace and prosperity allowed Loudoun farmers to experiment and increase their yields. In 1803, John Binns, a wealthy landowner in western Loudoun, published A Treatise on Practical Farming, a booklet that described 20 years of his agricultural experiments. Improvements in the plow made it possible for farmers to plow the land more deeply, increasing the yields of grain and corn. Larger yields led to an increase in cattle, sheep, and hog farming, and the growth of milling and woolen industries throughout the county. The development of the C&O Canal and 2 east-west turnpikes made it profitable for farmers to ship unprocessed wheat outside of Loudoun County. Despite improvements in technology, farming in Loudoun remained dependent upon hand labor long after the Civil War. The first slaves arrived in Loudoun shortly after the first Europeans in the 1720s. Purchased in Alexandria, Virginia, most of these slaves came straight from Africa. Of the 20,000 people who lived in the county on the eve of the Civil War, about 5,000 were slaves. One Loudoun family owned more than 100, but the average slave-owning family had less than 10 slaves. In decades leading up to the Civil War, much of the surplus slave population in the Upper South was sold to the new plantations in the Deep South. In Loudoun County, slave auctions were held every week on the steps of the courthouse in Leesburg.
I wish to purchase a large number of Negroes for the Southern market, men, women, boys, girls, and families, for which I will pay the highest price in cash. Persons having slaves to dispose of will find it to their interest to give me a call before selling. John Avis, slave trader.
Not all native Loudouners supported the institution of slavery. Samuel Janney, a member of the large pro-union Quaker Society in western Loudoun, believed that slavery was wasteful labor. The slavery issue came to a head in 1861 when citizens voted to secede from the Union. Both the Union and the Confederacy recognized Loudoun's strategic importance as a source of food for both troops and animals. But the county was spared from any serious fighting until the last year of the war. Then, in 1864, total war hit home. One Union soldier noted that in one day, 2 regiments of his brigade burned more than 150 barns, 1,000 stacks of hay, and 6 flour mills. It took some time for livestock to return to their pre-Civil War levels, but wheat production in the county nearly doubled between 1860 and 1870.
We are glad to hear from all parts of the county. Growing crops are looking remarkably well and promise a good yield. Loudoun is a great county. Her agricultural resources are immense. Loudoun Mirror, June 14, 1865.
By the 1870s, the county was once again reaping the benefits of its rich soil. Communities began to form farm clubs to discuss the latest developments in farming. Fairs or agricultural shows became popular to display the finest in Loudoun's farming, a tradition that continues to this day. The demand for milk in Washington, D.C. encouraged local residents to diversify into dairy farming, and by the mid-1870s, many smaller towns opened their own creameries. The population of Loudoun grew by less than 1,000 people between 1800 and 1900, and the area's agrarian economy had changed little. As mechanical power became available, traditional ways of farming were quickly replaced, but not all farmers were convinced.
Didn't think much of the tractor. Didn't like the noise they made, didn't like the smoke, didn't like the smell of them either. R.N. Lagarde, Lovettsville farmer.
In addition to mechanical inventions, Loudoun farming was being shaped by world events and government regulations. America's entry into the First World War brought price controls and production quotas set by the federal government. The draft took many young men from the farms, causing labor shortages. A women's group was formed to pick produce at Loudoun orchards to aid in the war effort. 4-H clubs were formed all over the county to attract younger men and women to farming. By the 1930s, Loudoun had one of the largest 4-H memberships in Virginia. While the stock market crash in 1929 seemed far removed from the residents of Loudoun, the drought of 1930 was the worst in 125 years. The average temperature that summer was 105 degrees. The county lost 99% of its corn crop, and many farmers were forced out of business. President Roosevelt's New Deal program promised relief to American agriculture in the 1930s. New Deal programs provided electricity and phones to many Loudoun farmers. The Rural Electrification Administration, created by the New Deal, provided low-cost loans to electric cooperatives. Finally, the dairy industry could use modern electric milking machines. The Great Depression ended with the United States entry into World War II. Once again, the federal government set price controls and production quotas, and the draft caused another labor shortage. In 1945, a prisoner of war camp was set up near Leesburg to house 170 German POWs who worked on local farms. At this time, almost 95% of the available farmland in Loudoun was being cultivated. Income from agricultural products, in most cases, doubled. The opening of Dulles International Airport in the 1960s quickly transformed the agrarian economy of Loudoun. The airport attracted new businesses, and today Loudoun is home to some of the largest high-tech and dot-com companies in the world. Despite a population boom and the transition from soil to silicon chips, agriculture remains a viable business. Loudoun is still known for its horse and beef cattle production. The soil still grows some of the best hay and forage for livestock. Alternative agriculture includes llamas, emus, vineyards, and nurseries. The land and its people continue to shape Loudoun's history and livelihood, creating an enduring farm heritage.